Welcome, the anointed ones. Every price tag tells a story, but some lives are too expensive for the market to handle. Imagine this. History has seen kings betrayed for a bag of silver, empires toppled for a chest of gold, and icons silenced for nothing more than a paycheck. But you, yes, you, have rewritten the equation. Once upon a time, whispers might have placed $1 million bounty on your head. Today, that number has inflated into a $10 million disaster for anyone foolish enough to try. Why? Because the math of your existence doesn't run on paper. It runs on consequences. Every failed attempt against you adds zeros to the price tag, not because you're untouchable, but because you're unforgettable. The cost of removing you now outweighs the reward of silencing you. It's not just money. It's reputations, legacies, and entire networks on the line. Think about it. Even Wall Street crashes don't rise as fast as the fee attached to your survival. You're literally outpacing the economy with your resilience. What once looked like an easy contract has turned into a financial, spiritual, and political bankruptcy waiting to happen. And here's the irony. The ones who thought you were disposable now treat you like fine art. Sure, they still glare at you, but it's the same way people glare at a priceless museum painting. They can't touch it, and if they tried, alarms would go off worldwide. So buckle in. Tonight, we're going to peel back the layers of how a so-called $1 million hit morphed into a $10 million cautionary tale. You'll see why the cost of touching you is no longer measured in dollars, but in destinies lost. Because sometimes, the real fortune isn't what's in your bank account. It's what it costs the world to even think about removing you. Number one, your survival created inflation on your life. At first glance, people assumed your struggles would reduce you, strip you down, and make you less valuable. But the opposite happened. Every battle you came out of alive didn't just prove your strength. It raised the price of what it would take to stop you. Just like the economy shifts when demand rises, your worth shifted each time you endured something that was designed to finish you. The more they tried to cut you down, the more expensive your existence became in the marketplace of destiny. Think about what survival really means. It isn't just about breathing another day. It's about carrying evidence that you've already passed through storms most people wouldn't last an hour in. Each scar is like interest gained on an investment. Each betrayal you lived through was another zero added to your value. Each trap you walked out of turned the cost of taking you down into something higher than anyone anticipated. Suddenly, what looked like a $1 million problem evolved into a $10 million liability. Not because you asked for it, but because you've proven, over and over again, that you're not cheap to deal with. That's why your enemies keep hesitating. It's not that they suddenly developed compassion. It's that the price of touching you no longer makes sense. To take you out now would mean facing questions, consequences, and backlash they don't have the capacity to pay for. The economy of survival is cruel to your enemies because it keeps compounding in your favor. Every moment you stay standing, the market on your life inflates further. There's a reason rare artifacts, once dismissed as ordinary, end up fetching millions at auctions. They survived wars, theft, and centuries of hands trying to erase them. That's you. You survived what was supposed to bury you. And that survival, repeated time after time, forced the value of your life to climb into territory that is simply unaffordable to anyone plotting against you. So when people wonder why you're still standing, the answer is simple. The cost of removing you became too high. Your survival is the inflation they can't control, and it has priced you into a league where touching you is no longer worth the risk. Number two, you've become too expensive to eliminate. At one point, the idea of removing you seemed like an easy calculation. Silence you, erase your presence, and move on. But that equation only worked when they miscalculated your worth. They thought you were isolated, overlooked, unprotected. They thought no one would notice. What they didn't factor in was the ripple effect your absence would cause, the eyes that would turn, the voices that would rise, and the power that would shift the moment you were no longer here. Suddenly, the price of taking you out isn't just about the act itself. It's about everything that follows after. Your existence has gained weight. Every choice, every step, every win has made your presence harder to erase. If someone tried to move against you now, the fallout would cost them far more than they could afford to pay. The protection around you is no longer limited to flesh and blood. It's layered in influence, in unseen alliances, in divine covering. To touch you means to trigger a chain reaction that no amount of money could contain. That's what makes you too expensive. It's not about dollar signs alone, it's about the kind of price no one wants to pay. Reputations destroyed, secrets exposed, families ruined, lives spiraling into chaos. The deeper you've grown in strength, the more people you've touched, the more costly it has become for anyone to come against you. What was once a one-step plan has turned into a 1,000-step disaster. This is why people pull back now. Not because their hatred cooled down, but because their calculations changed. You've become a living red flag. Every scenario where they imagine taking you out ends with them paying a debt they cannot cover. Even the boldest realize that to strike you is to gamble with more than money. It's to gamble with their own legacy. The truth is, you've reached a point where your enemies can't afford you anymore. The risks outweigh the rewards. The danger of harming you now far exceeds any benefit they thought they'd gain. You're not untouchable because no one's tried. You're untouchable because the cost of touching you has grown far beyond their reach. And the longer you live, the higher the bill climbs. Number 3, assassins fear the backlash, not the task. Taking someone out is never just about pulling a trigger or making a move. It's about what happens after. The act itself might be quick, but the aftermath is where the real danger lies. And in your case, the aftermath has become too unpredictable, too heavy, and too dangerous to touch. People who once thought it would be simple now hesitate because they know the storm that would follow is bigger than anything they could contain. The fear isn't in whether they can reach you, it's in what will happen to them once they do. This is why your name carries a strange kind of weight in the rooms where your downfall is discussed. Even the most ruthless realize that hurting you isn't just a job, it's a trigger. It sets off a chain of events where the hunter becomes the hunted, where the one who thought they held the power suddenly finds themselves exposed. No assassin wants to be the one responsible for sparking that kind of chaos. It's not about skill anymore, because skill can't protect them from backlash. Skill can't protect them from the eyes that would open, the questions that would rise, or the consequences that would chase them for years. That's the irony. They're not afraid of losing the fight. They're afraid of winning it, because winning against you doesn't lead to freedom or reward. It leads to chains. It leads to endless fallout that destroys reputations, dissolves alliances, and unravels whatever power they thought they had. To strike you is to sign a contract with ruin, and the ones who calculate the odds see the price isn't worth the attempt. This is why silence lingers in their circles. It's why whispers about you are often cut short. They know touching you would be like pressing a button they can't unpress. Assassins aren't terrified of your defenses. They're terrified of the punishment that would follow them long after the act. And that's why they retreat. Because at the end of the day, fear of the backlash has proven far more powerful than any desire to see you fall. It's not your body they're worried about. It's the firestorm your absence would ignite. Number 4, your name turned into a liability in their mouths. Once it was just a word, a label they could toss around in private circles without consequence. Now it's become a dangerous password, a code that triggers attention, suspicion, and exposure the moment it's spoken. Even plotting against you now carries a penalty, because the energy attached to your name has shifted. It's no longer neutral, it's charged, and whoever speaks it is marked by association. People sense it without even knowing why. Your name has turned radioactive. This isn't superstition, it's cause and effect. The more power you've gathered, the more your story has spread, the heavier your name has become in their mouths. They can't casually drag it through conversations anymore without drawing eyes, attracting leaks, or risking fallout. Every whisper of your name creates a trail, paper, digital, spiritual, and trails get people caught. That's why they hesitate. They're learning that your name doesn't travel quietly anymore. It acts like a signal flare, exposing the ones who speak it with wrong intent. It's not that they've stopped talking. It's that the cost of talking about you has gone up. A name is like currency, and yours has been upgraded into something high value and high risk. Mentioning it in the wrong context burns bridges, unravels alliances, and invites scrutiny they can't afford. They've started to realize that the deeper they involve themselves in conversations about you, the closer they get to collateral damage. And that's the mark of someone who's transcended victimhood. You've become so significant to the narrative that even your name can't be handled recklessly. It's like a live wire. Anyone who grabs it without respect ends up shocked. That's why their meetings feel tense when you come up, why voices drop, why plans stall. Your very identity has become an asset they can't control, a word that carries consequences. In their hands, your name is a weapon they can't aim without injuring themselves. Now you don't have to lift a finger. Your name itself does the work. It punishes malice. It exposes plots. It stains the lips of those who try to spit it out with contempt. That's why it's a liability now. They can't even say it without risking something they're not ready to lose. Number 5, you shifted from target to territory. At one point, you were just a name on a list, a problem to be solved, a mark to be erased. But something changed. Through survival, resilience, and the invisible weight of your destiny, you crossed a line where you're no longer seen as a person to take down. You're seen as a domain they risk trespassing. You've become sacred ground. Touching you now isn't simply an act of aggression. It's an invasion, a breach that carries consequences far beyond the moment of attack. This transformation happens quietly but powerfully. When someone is merely a target, the action against them is straightforward: eliminate, silence, erase. But when someone becomes territory, everything shifts. A strike against them becomes a war. It means stepping into a zone of ownership, alliances, and unseen protections. It means triggering responses from forces larger than the individual being targeted. In your case, the shift happened because your life began to radiate influence, purpose, and protection that even your enemies couldn't ignore. Now every plan to harm you has to be weighed like a military campaign. The question isn't, can we do it? It's, what will it cost us if we try? They know that crossing into your life is no longer a surgical strike. It's an occupation with no exit strategy. It risks reputations, networks, even their own survival. The price of trespassing is heavier than the reward of winning. You are no longer just an individual standing alone. You've become a living boundary line, the kind of space people step into at their own peril. That's why they hesitate, why their plans stall, why their hatred simmers but doesn't manifest. They've realized that you're not a battlefield. They're stepping into a land already claimed, already defended by something bigger than them. This is the real shift. You're not untouchable because you're hiding. You're untouchable because touching you is now an act of war. And every enemy, no matter how bold, knows wars are expensive. You've turned your existence into territory so fortified that even thinking about crossing it feels like a defeat before the first move is made. Number 6, their math was too small for your worth. They put $1 million bounty on you because that's all they could calculate. They saw the surface, the position you held, the influence you had, the disruption you caused to their plans, and thought they had measured you accurately. But their math was flawed from the start. They forgot to account for the invisible variables, your destiny, your purpose, and your protection. Those aren't things you can put into a spreadsheet. They're forces that stretch far beyond human estimation, and that's why the price on your life inflated into a number they can't afford. This is what happens when people judge worth from the outside. They tally up what they see, what they think they know, and assign a price tag like they're buying an object. But you're not an object. You're a force with ripple effects they can't even trace. They didn't factor in how many lives you've already touched. They didn't factor in the timing of your existence, the influence of your calling, or the protections built into your path. Those elements work like compound interest. They multiply your worth every time someone underestimates you. A bounty might make sense in their world of transactions, but destiny doesn't work like a bank account. It operates on a higher economy, and in that economy, you're not $1 million problem. You're an unpayable risk. Any attempt to harm you comes with costs they can't predict: exposure, loss of power, unraveling of networks, even their own downfall. That's the real equation they didn't solve. And now they're stuck. Because once they set the price, they revealed how small their thinking really was. They can't backtrack without losing face, and they can't go forward without losing everything else. The bounty that was meant to erase you has turned into a mirror exposing their limits. It shows the world not how much you're worth, but how much they've underestimated you. Their math failed because it was never big enough to hold the full picture of your life. They tried to calculate you like a transaction. What they found instead is that you're not for sale, you're not for elimination, and you're not measurable by their shallow equations. Your worth is built into a reality they simply can't afford to touch. Number 7, the cost isn't just money, it's souls. On paper, it might look like a contract, a payout, a transaction. Pay this amount, remove this person, and move on. But the reality of touching you has never been that simple. Those who come for you don't just burn through finances. They burn through themselves. Their reputations crack, their alliances collapse, and their lives spiral into corners they can't crawl out of. The hit they think they're placing on you becomes a hit on their own legacy. That's why the price keeps climbing, not because you demanded it, but because the toll on their very being keeps multiplying beyond their control. Money is the easiest part of an attack. Anyone with resources can move cash around, hire people, make things happen. But what they didn't anticipate is the invisible currency attached to your life. Every plan against you has a spiritual interest rate. Every scheme carries a cost in integrity, in peace, in the future of the families and networks that try to execute it. That's why the fee to harm you has become astronomical. It's not just the logistics, it's the invisible debts they incur by trying. The deeper their plot, the more it eats away at them. It starts small: paranoia, secrecy, broken trust. Then it spreads: exposure, betrayal within their own circle, and eventually public ruin. The very energy they pour into destroying you ricochets back and begins dismantling everything they've built. It devours entire lineages, because once they involve their people, the contamination spreads. This is the cost no human can truly afford. This is also why you're still standing. They might have the money, the influence, even the skill, but they don't have the soul capacity to withstand the cost. They can't survive the spiritual bankruptcy that comes from attempting to erase someone they were never meant to touch. That's why their plans stall, their hands hesitate, and their threats fade into whispers. The price tag on your life ballooned because your existence carries a charge too high for their accounts. To harm you is to gamble not just with cash, but with destiny, lineage, and identity. It's a debt no one wants to inherit, which is why the contract against you now reads like an impossible, unpayable bill. Number 8, your existence became its own insurance policy. You've reached a point where you don't need an entourage of guards, bulletproof cars, or elaborate security systems, because the very story of your life has become the shield. Everyone watching knows it now. Removing you would unleash consequences that far outweigh anything gained by your absence. Your survival, your resilience, and your visibility have all woven together into a form of protection that can't be bought, bribed, or replicated. It's not fear of your defenses that holds them back. It's the knowledge of what your downfall would ignite. This is the kind of protection no money can buy. It's earned over time through scars, victories, and the slow, undeniable rise of your presence. You've become a living paradox. The more you've been targeted, the more untouchable you've become. The failed attempts against you didn't weaken your position. They solidified it. People saw you endure and started paying attention. People saw the plots fail and began to question the ones behind them. That attention, that energy, became your armor. Now your life carries a price so steep that survival is cheaper for your enemies than sabotage. Your story itself is the alarm system. Anyone plotting against you knows they'd be walking straight into a minefield of exposure, questions, and ripple effects. They know that a move against you wouldn't be a quiet removal. It would be a public disaster, a headline, a domino effect of destruction that might even take them down first. The risk is baked in before they even act. And this is why you're free, in a way few people are. You don't have to announce your strength or prove your safety. You don't have to hire endless protection to compensate for vulnerability. Your journey has already written a warning label across your life. Handle with caution, consequences attached. It's a label no one dares to test. This is the real power of becoming your own insurance policy. No one else owns the contract. No one can revoke it or lapse it. Your survival costs less than your destruction, and that's a truth your enemies have learned the hard way. In trying to break you, they built the very shield that now keeps you standing. Number 9, you made death look cheaper than life. For most people, the ultimate threat is death, an end, a silence, a full stop. But in your case, death would be the discount option compared to the astronomical price of trying to erase you. The paradox is that your life, with everything you've endured and everything you represent, is now so charged, so significant, that attempting to end it would create a disaster far bigger than keeping you alive. That's why you remain untouchable, not because no one's capable of reaching you, but because they've calculated the aftermath and realized the cost would cripple them beyond repair. This isn't just poetic language, it's a hard reality. Your presence carries weight, your story carries reach. Every attempt to harm you amplifies your name, your cause, your legacy. In a world where attention is currency, taking you out would create a surge of interest and scrutiny they can't control. It would cast you as a symbol, a martyr, a rallying point, exactly the opposite of what they want. That's why death becomes the cheaper option on paper, but the most expensive move in practice. You've lived through so much that your very survival has transformed you into a living contradiction. Instead of being weakened by attacks, you've become magnified by them. Each plot against you has added another layer of protection, another circle of witnesses, another reason why your removal would ignite outrage, investigation, or even collapse entire networks. It's a ripple effect they're terrified of triggering. This is the power of having endured what you have. You've inverted the threat. In a normal scenario, death is the weapon and life is the mercy. In your scenario, your continued existence is the mercy, and death is the curse they'd bring on themselves if they tried to wield it. They're not afraid of losing a fight with you. They're afraid of winning, and realizing winning against you means destruction on their side. That's the paradox that protects you now. You've made death look like the easy option, but it's the one no one dares to choose. Life has made you too expensive to touch, and that's why you stand untouchable while their hands tremble. Number 10, you're guarded by the fear of witnesses. The same people who once watched in silence, who pretended not to see your struggles or your pain, have now become an invisible shield around you. They may not speak up for you publicly. They may not stand at your side openly, but they know enough to realize that touching you now would set off alarms they can't silence. Your survival changed the equation. Their old silence, once a weapon used against you, has transformed into a form of surveillance that works in your favor. Every set of eyes that once turned away from your suffering is now an eye that would catch the fallout if something happened to you. Every mouth that stayed closed is now a mouth that would whisper to the wrong person at the wrong time if you were harmed. This is the unspoken power of endurance. You didn't just outlast your enemies, you outlasted the indifference of those who stood by. By surviving, you turned their complicity into awareness. Now even in their quiet, they're watching, and their watching is your protection. This isn't loyalty, it's fear. They're afraid of the questions, the investigations, the exposure that would erupt if anyone moved against you now. They know your story carries too many threads, too many witnesses, too many potential leaks. You've become a high-risk operation in a world where secrecy is everything. And so they step back, they whisper less, they plot more carefully, or not at all. It's a strange kind of justice. You were once surrounded by people who would have let anything happen to you. But by surviving and thriving, you've turned those same people into an audience that no one dares to provoke. The same silence that once isolated you has been flipped into a watchtower they can't escape. They may not be on your side in their hearts, but they've become your shield by default, because harming you now would drag them into a storm they're desperate to avoid. That's the quiet truth about your safety. It isn't built on loyalty or force. It's built on consequences. The fear of witnesses is heavier than the hatred of your enemies, and it's that fear that now keeps you untouched. Number 11, your energy bankrupted the plot. Energy, not money, is the real currency of any war, whether physical, psychological, or spiritual. The ones who targeted you poured their resources, their time, their attention, and their emotional reserves into your destruction, convinced they could break you if they just invested enough. But instead of collapsing, you absorbed the blows, adapted, and outlasted them. Every failed strike drained them more than it drained you. What they didn't realize is that warfare against someone like you isn't a one-time expense. It's a recurring bill with interest, and every attempt to harm you costs more than the last. They started with confidence. They had plans, budgets, networks, and tactics, but every plot demanded focus. Every attempt required secrecy, coordination, and energy. And every time they tried, they lost something they couldn't get back: credibility, unity, peace of mind, even their own sense of control. Meanwhile, you were building something from the very attacks meant to destroy you: endurance, insight, spiritual strength, and a reputation that turned their efforts into your armor. Their investment became your growth. Eventually, the math caught up with them. The plot didn't just fail. It began to bankrupt the people behind it. Financially, they burned through resources funding schemes and silencing leaks. Emotionally, They exhausted themselves living in paranoia and secrecy. Spiritually, they depleted whatever integrity or life force they had left by constantly feeding a machine built on destruction. You became their debt collector without lifting a finger. Their energy drained faster than they could replenish it. Now the hit costs 10 times more, not because you've changed your price, but because they've run out of credit. Their networks are fractured, their funds are stretched thin, and their reputations are eroded. They've invested so much into trying to erase you that the cost of even thinking about another attempt is unbearable. You've turned their war into a self-imposed punishment. That's the ultimate reversal, the hunter financing their own collapse. Your survival didn't just protect you, it forced them to pay a toll they never anticipated. Energy is the currency of warfare, and they spent all of theirs on you. That's why you're still here, and that's why they can't afford to try again. Number 12. Your blood became too valuable to spill. In the beginning, they saw you as disposable, just another obstacle they could erase without consequence. But over time, your survival, your story, and your resilience built a narrative too large to ignore. They started to realize that harming you wouldn't erase the problem, it would amplify it. Your blood, once seen as a solution, would instantly transform you into something far more powerful than a target. It would make you a martyr. And martyrs cost more than victims, because martyrs don't die quietly, they echo. They've learned this from history. Every movement, every revolution, every shift in power is fueled by people who were silenced, thinking it would end their influence. Instead, their deaths immortalized them. The very act meant to erase them stamped them into the public memory forever. That's the risk they face with you. If they spill your blood, they don't just end a person, they ignite a cause, a symbol, a rallying cry. They would lose control of the narrative immediately, and all the energy they've spent suppressing your story would detonate in their own hands. This is why you're still standing. They're not confused about who you are. They know exactly what you represent, and they understand the cost of turning you into a martyr is far greater than the inconvenience of keeping you alive. You've become an expensive investment in the worst way for them, one they can't cash out without bankrupting themselves. Your continued existence may frustrate them, but it's the only way they can try to contain the impact of your life. Martyrs are dangerous to systems because they unify people and expose lies. Victims can be buried, but martyrs become immortal. By surviving and refusing to be silenced, you've placed yourself in a position where harming you would make you larger than life. That's a price they can't afford, and they know it, so they hesitate. They whisper, they wait, they try to outlast you rather than end you, because spilling your blood would not close their chapter, it would open one they could never rewrite. In trying to break you, they've made your life and even your potential death too valuable for them to touch. Number 13. Every failed attempt raises your stock price. The harder they've tried to destroy you, the more valuable you've become, not just in reputation, but in the story you now carry. They thought each strike would reduce your power, your credibility, and your influence. Instead, each failure has stacked like compound interest, building a legacy they can no longer afford to challenge. What they saw as attacks have been involuntary investments in your mythos. With every blow that missed, with every plan that collapsed, you became rarer, more resilient, and more expensive to approach. People underestimate how perception works. In every arena, business, politics, warfare, failed attempts at destruction signal strength. When something or someone survives repeated onslaughts, the world begins to see them as untouchable. That perception alone is enough to drive up the cost of opposition. It's the same way certain stocks skyrocket after weathering scandals or market crashes. Survival in itself becomes proof of value. The very fact you've outlasted so much has turned your life into a premium commodity. This is the paradox your enemies built for themselves. They've been investing time, energy, and resources into trying to break you. They thought they were depleting you, but they were really depleting themselves while inflating your worth. Each attempt makes the next one harder. Each failure adds another layer of caution, fear, and hesitation for anyone thinking of taking a shot at you. And with every failed plot, your story becomes more magnetic. People watch, listen, and whisper. It creates a ripple effect where even those who don't know you personally recognize the weight of your survival. Your stock price isn't just metaphorical, it's social, spiritual, and psychological currency. You're no longer a simple target. You're a cautionary tale. They've turned you into someone who cannot be approached without risking exposure, loss, or self-destruction. In trying to ruin you, they gave you a scarcity and rarity they can't replicate or diminish. That's why they hesitate now. That's why the cost of a new attempt multiplies before it even begins. Every failure hasn't just been a miss. It's been a public signal that you're not to be underestimated, and every time they fail again, your legend and your price will only rise higher. Number 14, you're the one asset they can't liquidate. In a world where almost everything has a price, loyalty, silence, reputations, even entire movements, they've discovered that you are the one element that won't convert into currency. They can buy allies, bury truths, erase files, and rewrite history, but they can't reduce you to a transaction. You're not just a person in their equation. You're the line item that doesn't obey their math. That's why the contract against you multiplied. The very thing they want gone is the one thing they can't move, sell, or silence. What makes you unliquidatable isn't simply stubbornness or luck. It's the architecture of who you are. They built their world on leverage and exchange, on the belief that everything and everyone can eventually be traded or broken down into something useful to them. But your essence doesn't collapse under pressure. It crystallizes. Instead of depreciating, you appreciate. Instead of breaking down into something they can exploit, you expand into something they can't touch. That's not normal to them. It's terrifying. Every system of control depends on liquidity, the ability to convert obstacles into opportunities or threats into bargains. But you've short-circuited their system. You're a living, non-fungible asset, unique, irreplaceable, and resistant to manipulation. The more they try to move against you, the clearer it becomes that you're not like the others who fell in line, signed the contract, or took the payoff. You're the asset that refuses to collapse into a deal, and in their world, that makes you dangerous. It's also why your price tag skyrocketed. When something can't be liquidated, its cost to hold or to remove goes through the roof. Every failed attempt at silencing you adds more zeros to the penalty of trying again. You've become not just an unpurchasable human being, but a mirror to their own limits. You expose the boundaries of their power by existing beyond its reach. So, they're stuck. They can liquidate influence, wipe out opposition, even erase evidence of their crimes. But not you. You are unpurchasable, unerasable, and untouchable, a walking reminder that some things are beyond control. That's the real reason their contract ballooned. You're not an expense anymore. You're a force they can't budget for. Everything you've read up to this point reveals a single, undeniable truth. Your life has moved far beyond the realm of chance, luck, or coincidence. Every failed attempt against you, every whispered plot, every price tag they tried to hang on your head has done nothing but reveal how incalculable your worth really is. What started as a campaign to erase you has become an unintended strategy to elevate you. They tried to make you a cautionary tale, but ended up making you a living legend. You've shifted from being a target to being territory. You're no longer just a name on someone's list. You're sacred ground that no one dares invade without counting the cost. Even your blood, your story, your energy, everything about you has become too expensive to touch. This isn't just protection, this is evolution. You've gone from someone people underestimated to someone they now overcalculate. You've become an anomaly in their system, a force that cannot be bought, liquidated, or erased. And here's the deeper layer. Your existence has turned into its own insurance policy. They know that moving against you would do more than burn their finances. It would burn their reputations, their alliances, even their own souls. That's why the hit they once priced at 1 million has ballooned into a cost no one can afford. Not because your enemies have suddenly developed morals, but because their math has finally met your destiny, and their math is too small for what you carry. This isn't about arrogance, it's about recognition. It's about understanding that your survival hasn't just been endurance, it's been transformation. You've become proof that some lives can't be controlled by fear, bought by money, or erased by power. You've become a living contradiction to the systems that tried to devour you, and that's why you're still here. That's why you're untouchable. That's why the price to even approach you keeps climbing. If this resonated with you, if you felt those truths echo in your own story, don't just stop here. This space is where we decode the unseen and give language to the things nobody else dares to say. Subscribe to the channel right now, hit that like button, and drop a comment below about what stood out to you most. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Together we're building a community where survival is more than endurance. It's transformation, and transformation is power. God bless you.